And the one thing that's harming them in Hollywood is that they get exposed for being who they really are.
What if I told you one of the oldest Best Actor nominees in Academy Awards history spent nearly 3 decades risking his life so other actors could become stars? Before audiences recognized Richard Farnsworth's face, they had already watched him fall from horses, crash through windows, and perform dangerous stunts hundreds of times without ever knowing his name. He didn't become a respected actor until he was almost 60 years old, and by the time Hollywood finally celebrated him, his greatest battle wasn't on a movie set, it was with his own failing health. This is the remarkable story of Richard Farnsworth, a stable boy who became one of Hollywood's greatest unsung legends, proving that sometimes success arrives only after a lifetime of patience, sacrifice, and determination. Richard William Farnsworth entered the world on September 1, 1920 in Los Angeles, California. His childhood began like many others, with a hard-working father, a caring mother, and dreams that stretched no farther than the neighborhood around him. But everything changed when tragedy struck. At just 7 years old, Richard lost his father, leaving his mother to raise him alongside his 2 sisters during the darkest years of the Great Depression. Life became a daily struggle. Money was scarce, opportunities were almost non-existent, and there were few people to guide a young boy trying to understand the world around him. Yet amid those hardships, Richard discovered something that would shape the rest of his life: horses. In 1937, Paramount Pictures placed an advertisement searching for 200 experienced horse riders for a new production called The Adventures of Marco Polo. The studio offered $7 a day, a fortune compared to what Richard was earning at the stable. Without hesitation, the teenage horseman answered the ad. For 5 weeks, he rode alongside hundreds of other extras. His role couldn't have been smaller. He was simply one of hundreds of anonymous riders dressed as Mongolian horsemen, charging across the screen during massive battle sequences. No one in the audience knew his name. No one in the credits mentioned him. To the studio, he was simply another rider on horseback. But behind the scenes, experienced stunt coordinators noticed something special. Richard wasn't just comfortable riding horses, he could control them under dangerous conditions. He could switch horses while moving, perform difficult falls, and handle situations that many trained riders avoided. Those abilities quickly earned him more work. One production led to another, and before long, Richard had become one of Hollywood's most dependable stunt horse performers. He appeared in A Day at the Races, worked on Gunga Din, and rode through battle scenes in Gone with the Wind. Many of those films became timeless Hollywood classics, yet Richard remained invisible. His work helped create unforgettable moments, but the applause always belonged to someone else. That was simply how the business worked. The stars stood in front of the camera, the stunt performers took the risks behind it. For Richard, recognition wasn't part of the job description. His responsibility was simple: deliver the stunt, stay alive, and return the next morning ready to do it all again. Year after year, directors trusted him with increasingly dangerous assignments because they knew he would never let them down. By 1960, Richard Farnsworth had already spent more than 20 years doing some of the most dangerous work in Hollywood. That year, he joined the enormous production of Spartacus, directed by Stanley Kubrick. The film featured massive battle scenes, thousands of extras, and months of physically demanding work. Richard was hired as one of the stunt gladiators, spending nearly a year on the Universal backlot fighting in arena sequences and riding horses through large-scale battle scenes. But this experience changed the way Richard looked at the industry. He realized stunt performers had very little protection. There were few safety standards, limited representation, and almost no organized effort to improve working conditions. The people performing the most dangerous jobs often had the least influence over how they were treated. Instead of accepting that reality, Richard decided to help change it. In 1961, he became one of the founding members of the Stuntmen's Association of Motion Pictures, an organization created to promote safer working conditions, better representation, and greater respect for stunt professionals throughout Hollywood. For perhaps the first time in his career, Richard's name became associated with something bigger than a single film. He wasn't just helping create movie magic anymore. He was helping protect the people responsible for making it possible. Even after that achievement, he kept working. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, he continued appearing behind the scenes in productions like The Outlaw Jose Wales, Blazing Saddles, Papillon, and numerous westerns directed by legends such as John Ford, Howard Hawks, and Sam Peckinpah. Nearly 40 years had passed since he first answered that newspaper advertisement. He was one of Hollywood's most respected stuntmen. Yet almost no one outside the industry knew who Richard Farnsworth was. By the mid-1970s, years of crashes, falls, horseback accidents, and physically demanding stunt work had begun taking their toll. Richard knew his body couldn't continue absorbing punishment forever. Rather than waiting until an injury forced him to quit, he made a difficult decision. He stepped away from stunt work. Most people would have considered retirement the natural next chapter. Richard, however, saw another opportunity. He wanted to act. In 1976, he landed one of his first meaningful speaking parts as the stagecoach driver in The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, starring Goldie Hawn and George Segal. The role itself wasn't large, but for the first time, audiences were paying attention to Richard Farnsworth, not because he could perform dangerous stunts, but because they were watching him speak, react, and simply exist on screen. His calm presence immediately stood out. He wasn't trying to imitate anyone. He wasn't performing like a traditional movie star. He simply brought authenticity to every scene. That quiet honesty became his greatest strength. Everything changed in 1978. Director Alan J. Pakula cast Richard in Comes a Horseman, a Western drama starring Jane Fonda and James Caan. Richard played Dodger, an aging ranch hand whose wisdom and quiet strength anchored much of the film's emotional weight. There were no spectacular stunts, no dramatic horseback falls, no dangerous action sequences. Instead, the role demanded subtle emotion, warmth, and honesty. Richard delivered all three with remarkable ease. Critics were stunned. Many couldn't believe the man delivering such a deeply moving performance had spent decades working almost entirely in the background. He wasn't acting like a cowboy, he had lived that life for years, and the camera captured every bit of that authenticity. Although Christopher Walken ultimately won the Oscar for The Deer Hunter, Richard's performance earned widespread praise. He also received honors from the National Board of Review and shared recognition from the National Society of Film Critics. For someone who had spent decades without even receiving screen credit, the acknowledgement meant far more than a trophy. It proved he belonged. Most actors dream of leading a major motion picture early in their careers. Richard Farnsworth had to wait more than 40 decades. In 1982, Canadian director Philip Borsos offered him the starring role in The Gray Fox, based on the true story of legendary train robber Bill Miner. The film followed Miner after his release from San Quentin prison following more than 30 years behind bars. Struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing world, he found unexpected inspiration after watching The Great Train Robbery and eventually returned to a life of crime, becoming an unlikely folk hero. Interestingly, Richard wasn't the original choice. Actor Harry Dean Stanton had initially accepted the role before leaving the project for another film. That unexpected opening gave Richard the opportunity of a lifetime. He made the most of it. His portrayal of Bill Miner was filled with warmth, humor, dignity, and quiet sadness. Critics praised the performance as one of the finest of the year. The Gray Fox became both a critical and commercial success, winning multiple Genie Awards, Canada's highest film honors. Richard won Best Actor, received a Golden Globe nomination, and earned international praise for carrying an entire film with remarkable confidence. Perhaps the most astonishing part of the story was his age. Richard Farnsworth was 62 years old when he became the lead actor in a major motion picture. Most careers begin decades earlier. His was only just reaching its peak. After spending 44 years making other actors look like heroes, Hollywood finally allowed Richard Farnsworth to become the hero himself, and audiences quickly realized they had been waiting far too long. After the success of The Gray Fox, Richard Farnsworth was no longer Hollywood's best-kept secret. Directors who had spent decades watching him work behind the scenes finally realized what audiences had discovered. His greatest talent wasn't performing stunts, it was bringing honesty to every character he played. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Farnsworth became one of the industry's most respected character actors. He never relied on flashy performances or dramatic speeches. Instead, he brought quiet strength, warmth, and authenticity that made every scene feel believable. In 1984, he appeared in The Natural alongside Robert Redford, playing Red Blow, the loyal coach who became a steady voice of wisdom throughout the film. The following year, he portrayed Matthew Cuthbert in the acclaimed television adaptation of Anne of Green Gables. His gentle performance earned widespread praise and won him a Gemini Award, further proving that audiences connected with his natural style of acting. Hollywood was finally giving Richard Farnsworth something he had earned decades earlier: recognition. In 1992, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. 5 years later, he was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. The stable boy who once cleaned horse stalls for $5 a week now had his name permanently honored among Hollywood legends. Yet the greatest performance of his life was still waiting. In 1998, filmmaker David Lynch made a surprising decision. Known for surreal films like Blue Velvet and the television series Twin Peaks, Lynch chose to direct The Straight Story, a simple, heartfelt film based on the true story of Alvin Straight. Coming out of retirement, Farnsworth immersed himself in the role, speaking with Alvin Straight's family and learning about the man behind the remarkable journey. The similarities between actor and character were striking. Both were elderly, both walked with canes because of physical limitations, both understood what it meant to keep moving despite pain. What few people on the production truly understood was how serious Farnsworth's own condition had become. He had been diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer, and the disease had spread to his bones. For many days, the pain was so severe that simply standing became difficult. The crew adjusted the production schedule to accommodate his health, but once the cameras started rolling, Farnsworth delivered a performance filled with remarkable grace, dignity, and emotional depth. There was no need for dramatic acting techniques. His life experience carried every scene. When The Straight Story was released, critics praised it as one of the year's finest films. In 2000, Richard Farnsworth received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. At 79 years old, he became the oldest Best Actor nominee in Oscar history at the time, a record that stood for more than 2 decades. Although Kevin Spacey won the Academy Award for American Beauty, Farnsworth earned numerous honors, including the Independent Spirit Award for Best Male Lead and recognition from major critics organizations across the country. At the Academy Awards ceremony, host Billy Crystal singled him out, celebrating one of the most inspiring comeback stories Hollywood had ever seen. The audience applauded. Few realized the painful secret Richard carried that evening. Behind every smile during that awards season was a man fighting unbearable pain. Richard Farnsworth's cancer had continued to spread throughout his body. The disease affected his bones and spine, leaving him partially paralyzed and in constant discomfort. Doctors could treat the symptoms, but they could no longer stop the illness. For a man who had spent more than 60 years surviving dangerous falls, horse accidents, and physically demanding stunt work, this became the one challenge he couldn't overcome. Looking back, Farnsworth's career remains almost unmatched. He spent more than 60 decades working in the film industry. He contributed to over 300 productions. He doubled for some of the biggest stars of the 20th century. He helped establish the Stuntmen's Association of Motion Pictures, improving safety and working conditions for generations of stunt performers. He built a reputation for professionalism, integrity, and authenticity. Even after becoming an acclaimed actor, he remained the same humble cowboy who believed actions mattered more than attention. Most remarkable of all, he never gave up on the possibility that something greater still awaited him. Many people believe success has an expiration date. Richard Farnsworth proved otherwise. He spent 40 years working in the shadows before Hollywood finally recognized his talent. When that opportunity arrived, he didn't waste it. Instead, he delivered performances that continued to inspire audiences decades later. His story reminds us that greatness isn't always immediate. Sometimes the longest road leads to the most meaningful destination. Richard Farnsworth may have entered Hollywood as an anonymous stunt rider, but he left behind a legacy as one of the most genuine performers American cinema has ever known. If you enjoyed this story and want to discover more incredible lives from Hollywood's golden age, be sure to subscribe. There are countless forgotten legends whose stories deserve to be remembered, and we'll be bringing you another unforgettable journey in the next video.